Hi, and welcome to part 2 of our series on how to print a large Excel spreadsheet. And as you've seen, it can be kind of a challenge. Well, we're going to look at other ways, and actually some of the older, more default ways of how we can set up printing and get that spreadsheet to look the way you want it to look on paper. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library. And let's look at that part 2 of Excel spreadsheets and printing. Our example spreadsheet is exactly the same one that we used in part 1. And while I have reset some of the settings that we used in our final product, I have kept some of them just for the sake of time. So, for example, I've kept our adjustments for the column width exactly the way they were in our example 1. I've also repeated print titles for each page, and I've kept the page numbers as well. And as we looked at our spreadsheet last time, we realized that if we have a cell that has a lot of lines in it, that it is probably better to align all of the text to the top of the cell rather than to, say, the center or the bottom of a cell. And so I've kept that top of the cell alignment as well. Other than that, we're kind of starting from scratch. Instead of using buttons on the ribbon, this time we're going to go to a more perhaps old-fashioned way, but certainly a very reliable way to look at how we can set up our printing. And to do that, we are going to go to File on the far left and click on that. And then we're going to come down about halfway in the green to Print. And as we realized in our last session, on the right, we have a print preview. And at this point, it says we have 231 pages that we are previewing, which is about half a ream. And as I scroll down, while these initial pages have a lot of extra space in them, we can see that about midway, we have several columns that seem to fit on one page fairly well. And so this middle section looks pretty good. And then as we come down even farther, we have a lot of extra space on this third section. So it looks like we are printing down a whole lot of pages, and then we're printing about 3 pages across for each record. Well, what we want to do, first of all, as we look at our printing options, is that we want to come over to the left where right underneath the print button, we have a printer choice. And you will use this to choose the printer that you want to use. And right now, this is the printer that I use. But below that printer, you have printer properties. Now, these change depending on the printer you have. But you may be able to use some of the choices here, at least on this basic tab, for your printer as well. Well, we'll just simply cancel out of the printer settings. Now let's start with the options below where we choose the printer, and it's a whole settings group that we need to look at. First of all, our first choice here is Print Active Sheets. So that is the sheet that is open, or if you have grouped the sheets, it would be the grouped sheets that you say, okay, I want to print the active sheets. Now, if we click the drop down here, it says we could print the entire workbook. And while you can do that, here is truly a caution for you, and that is make sure that each one of the worksheets is formatted the way it should be so that it can be printed correctly. Sometimes people choose this print entire workbook and they don't look to see if the worksheets are individually formatted, which means that generally there's going to be at least one spreadsheet that prints in a way that is not very conducive to reading it. So if you print the entire workbook, that's fine, but be sure to print preview each one of the worksheets in that workbook first to make sure that they are indeed ready to be printed by the way they've been formatted. Now, another thing that we can do is print a selection. So let me click that one and let me go back to my spreadsheet, and I have at some point here selected some cells, and I've decided that I only want to print these cells, and that can come in really handy if you need a quick answer for someone. You just select the cells, you click File, you click Print, and then here you only print the selection and nothing else. And because of the way this is currently formatted, I have one column that is on a second page, but very easy to do. Now let me go back a second. I'm just going to print active sheets here. And let me go to another place where we can set up printing only selected cells. So let me go back. And in this case, where we're going to go is page layout. And in the page setup group, in the middle of that group, we have print area. And we set a print area by selecting cells, as I've done, and click on Set the Print Area. Now, when I go to File and Print, it will only print those cells. Now, the thing about that ribbon button is these settings save when you save the workbook. And so when someone else opens the workbook, they are only going to be able to print these selected cells, which maybe is what you want, but occasionally you will look at a workbook and you'll say, wait a minute, I want to print this whole worksheet, everything on it. Why am I only getting these few cells? If that's the case, be sure to look for print area and clear the print area, and then you should be able to go back to File and print anything that you want to print. If you use the option here for printing a selection, then that is just temporary because you only want to print this selection, but you still want to save your worksheet as the entire thing. So a slight difference here that you might want to think about as you work with printing. One other option right below where it says Print Active Sheets is to say which pages, now these are actually the physical sheets, but which pages do I want to print? So it could be that I say, oh, I want to print pages 2 to 20. And then it would actually print, as I come here, page 2, and then as I go through all of these sheets through page 20. I've now reset some of our settings here, so we are back to print active sheets. And then we're going to come down below that, and this says print one-sided. When I click the drop down, it says I could print on both sides and decide whether I want to flip the pages on the long edge or the short edge. Here's what happens. With my printer properties, if I set those are the default. But if I choose, for example, to print one-sided, even though the printer properties are set to double-sided, I could say, no, I only want to print one-sided this one time. So these settings are going to override what is here and the printer options. So kind of keep that in mind. I can print one-sided or I can print double-sided. And then I can either collate or I can print uncollated as well. But coming down from here, we have portrait orientation or landscape orientation. Well, we know we have records that go 3 pages across, and for those who are trying to read those records, it may be easier if we say, needs to be landscape. Now, of course, this is definitely a button on the ribbon as well, but it's kind of a nice place where you may think that you need to just print portrait. And then when you actually look at the print preview, you realize that, oh, you know what, I need to change that setting. And so you can do it here with File Print. Now that takes us to 224 pages, so we've saved some space along the way. We're only going to print 2 across, but it's still a lot of pages, so maybe we can make some other adjustments even from this place, from File Print, that will help us print fewer pages. Below Landscape Orientation, again, the default on our printer is one thing, but we might come in here and choose another size, at least for this particular time that we print, although I'm just going to go with letter. And then we have normal margins. Now we can click the drop down here and we can say, okay, the last custom setting was a 1/2 inch instead of 3/4 of an inch at the top and the bottom. Let's try that. That changed it to 200 pages, didn't it? But we could also say, oh no, I need a wide margin, or we also have the narrow margin as well. And then we have a choice for custom margins that we're going to look at in just a little bit. And then we have scaling. Now remember that scaling lets us reduce, really it's the font size so that it fits on one page, but a really small spreadsheet might fit on one page, and it would save you from having just a little bit of leftover on a second page. Fit all columns on one page. Now we might try that, or fit all rows on one page. We know this is too big. And then we also have some custom scaling options as well. But what we will do for right now is leave it the way it is. And then what we can do though is go back to page 1, and down at the bottom right, we have this little button that's called Show Margins. And when I click on it, you can see how we get these squares at the top. And they let us resize columns, or sometimes it's the margins that you need to, by eyeing how things look, change the margins. What it doesn't let you do is change the row height, but you can change the margins and you can change the column widths. And sometimes that's all you need to make things fit on your paper even better. So don't forget this little button down at the bottom, the Show Margins button. Now let's go below where it says Scaling and go to Page Setup. And this link has some choices on it that we have seen before. And anytime when we were looking at these settings choices, if it said, say, for example, custom margins or custom scaling, anything like that, those choices would take us to where Page Setup also takes us. So let's click on Page Setup, and we get a dialog box that Excel has just always had, so you may be familiar with this. Starting at the top of the Page tab, we have Orientation. And so we could very easily here select Portrait or Landscape, and we have already selected Landscape, so that's where that radio button is right now. Now for scaling, we could say that we want to adjust to, and right now it's at 100% normal size, or we also have the option to fit to so many pages wide by so many pages tall. For us today, let's say that we want to make it 2 pages wide and just leave it at that. This is a choice that is not found anyplace else, and that is, what is the print quality? And at 600 dpi, this is actually the best quality, And at 200 dpi, it would print much lighter. It would save you some ink, especially if this is an initial print. It's not your final printout. But at 600 dots per inch, this is a more final copy. And then the first page number, we could change that from auto to, say, 1 or 2, or if we're doing some sort of a printout that maybe this is the second portion of a print, then we could start at a different page number and it would pick up on that. Down at the bottom right, we're going to see this options button as we go through this dialog box. And when we click on options, it takes us to the same place every time, and that is the printer default settings. And that is our page tab. Now to the right of the page tab, up at the top left, we have the margins tab. And this is where you can individually and uniquely set all of the margins. So right now we have the top margin as 1/2 an inch, but maybe we want to set it to something else. Now keep in mind that if you have a header and down here at the bottom right, a footer, you would also want to be somewhat aware of where those headers and footers are set. So if at the top margin I say, ooh, I want to make it 0.25, well, the header is larger than that. So let's pull it down a little bit lower. And you'll notice that as I make these changes, I can also see the line here that shows how these are going to affect my page. Now I can change the right margin, and maybe I want to make it, well, this defaults to 0.15, but what if I want to make it 0.25 instead? Well, I can simply come in and type the number that I want to use. So on the left, right now it's at 0.35. Maybe when I click the down arrow, it defaults a little bit differently than I'd like. So I will put a 0.25. Now keep in mind that not all printers allow the same margins. Some of them will require a certain top and bottom margin or a certain left and right margin. So you'll need to work within the defaults of your printer as well. And then down at the bottom, I can make that 0.25. Let me just even click right here and put in the 0.25. And then for the footer, we'll make it small as well. Now, here is an option that you only see with this dialog box, and that is if you have especially a small spreadsheet, you might decide that you want to center it on the printed sheet. And so you can center it horizontally or vertically on that page, which is really nice. It's a great option. So don't forget that it is here within the Margins tab. Now going on from there, let's go to the Header Footer tab. And here is where we can create custom headers and footers. And while we have a lot of options with headers and footers, by changing our view or even inserting headers and footers, this may be where you want to do your work with headers and footers. So I'm just going to put in a custom header. And let's look at the combination here of the text at the top and then our toolbar here that runs across the center. As I rest my mouse on that A, it says, well, this is format text. And then I get information about how to format text up above. So it says select the text, then choose the format text button. So if I were to type something here, name of work, I would select the text and then click on the A, and then it takes me to kind of the old-fashioned way of changing fonts. So I could change the font, and I get a preview in the lower right. I can change the style, maybe to bold, change the size, and then I can even put in underline, change the color, and put in some special effects. But I can click OK, and there it is. Now in the center section, it could be that I want to insert a page number, or I might want to put in page of, and then number of pages. So I could do both. And again, if I'm a little curious or a little mystified by how this works, to insert a page number, date, time, file path, file name, or tab name, position the insertion point in the edit box, then choose the appropriate button. So if I want to put in page of number of pages, and then I can even press enter, and I could put in the date, and I'll put in a space here, and time. Then let me click on the right-hand section and notice that it right aligns as well. And for this then, I can insert a file path, and really it's the path and the file. Let me press enter, as opposed to the file by itself. I'll press the space bar here, and then here is the worksheet tab name if we'd rather have that. So we have all sorts of combinations of information that we can put into our header or footer. They work the same way. And then to the right of that, you could insert a picture. And if you insert the picture and select it, then to the right of that, you could also format the picture. But we're going to click OK. And then we have all of this crazy header that is just going to be kind of a jumbled mess. Maybe I should take out some of that. But you can see very easily how this works. So let me see, name of workbook. Let's take that out. Page of pages. I'm also going to take out this path and click OK. All right, so now it just tells me that I have one of however many pages and the date and the time. And then I could do the same with the custom footer. Now here's the interesting thing. Down at the bottom, I have some other options. So different odd and even pages. So I could have, say, the path on odd pages and the number of pages on the even pages or something like that. A different first page. So again, I could have nothing on the first page and a whole lot of other stuff on the rest of the pages. I can scale with the document so that the header and the footer don't pop out. They don't overwrite anything that is on the regular page. And then I could also align with page margins, which I don't know why I wouldn't want to do that. But let's go ahead and say OK, just to see how we're doing here. And so now we have 182 pages. Yeah, my header kind of was a little short there. So, you know, all I need to do is grab those little boxes that we had from our, as we come down to the bottom right, the show margins. And you can see how I can kind of play with that, even though I've gone into that dialog box and now it gives me some good information. And I am really filling out these pages probably a little better. Now, I only have 200 pages, so if I come down to page 100 or so, here is the second page, the second part of the different records. And it could be, looking at this, I could say, you know what, I think I could widen out those margins on the left and the right. And I still have 200 pages. Let's see if we can maybe give a little more room here for our top margin, maybe our bottom margin. And I have 224 pages now, so I need to readjust a little bit. But you can see how just by adjusting the margins, how that can really make a difference in how this works. Now, we did in page setup have something else that we needed to do. Let's also look at the sheet tab. Now, the sheet tab lets you define the print area. Because of some of the choices that I've already made, the print area here is grayed out. However, if I hadn't defined this as having 2 pages wide, for example, I could go to the print area and say, I only want to print these cells and no others. Remember that we've already set up the print titles as the first row, but if we hadn't already done that, we could also come down to reset the columns. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Sometimes people don't put in border lines, and as a result, the data tends to kind of all meld together, especially with large spreadsheets. And so people will say, oh, you know what, I want the printer to print the grid lines because I've not added in any other kind of lines. I can say I don't want to print in color, I just want black and white, or I want a draft quality. Now let's see what happens when we do this row and column headings. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on OK. So first of all, you can see that we now have those little dotted lines that are the grid lines that are now going to print, but the column headings that we said we want to see are really the A, B, C, D, E, and it gives you the row numbers. Now, depending on what you need to do, sometimes people need that information for a variety of reasons, but for the most part, this isn't an option that a lot of people would print, especially as a final report. So let me go back to Page Setup and go to Sheet, our last tab, and I think I'm going to turn off the row and column headings. And then I'll need to click OK for that to change in our preview. One of the most important settings that people forget about when they have a spreadsheet, a large spreadsheet, is that the page order is the most important thing that you want to use with a large spreadsheet. If you consider that we are going to perhaps print 2 pages across, then we really wouldn't want to go down 100 pages and then try to find where the second piece of information for a client or for a person is. We would want to go, first of all, over and then down. And for large spreadsheets, this is one of the most important settings. You want your records to go across, and if it's across 1 page or 10 pages, you want that consistency so that you can line up and keep track of that one person or that one item all the way across all of the pages, and then go down to other pages and keep track of those rows. So be sure to use page order if you don't use any other setting here within Page Setup. Well, let's click on OK. Border lines ready to print. And we have the first set of cells going across, filling that page very nicely. And then in the second half, they don't quite fill up the page, but still, it looks pretty nice, doesn't it? And so now we still have 200 pages. Let's try custom scaling. Let's fit all columns on 1 page. And you can see how much smaller that print is. And if you're not careful, it could be that it just becomes unreadable. But we have now 56 pages if we do that. And depending on what's required of you, that could be the choice that you want to make. So that is printing using File Print, defining settings on the printer, defining settings here as well, and even then going to Page Setup as another option when you do your printing of spreadsheets. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.